Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It's my pleasure this evening to extend a very warm welcome to you all. To family, to friends, to colleagues, to students, and our wider community. To the inaugural lecture of Professor of Global Studies at the School of Languages and Cultures, Sally Hill. I'm Robin Longhurst, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, and as a fellow social scientist, I'm delighted to have the honour this evening of introducing you to Sally Hill's research before inviting Sally to give her inaugural lecture. Sally studied in New Zealand, Italy and the US and received her PhD with honours from the University of Chicago, where she was also a doctoral fellow at the Franca Institute for the Humanities and a Whiting Dissertation Fellow. She joined Victoria University of Wellington in 2004 as a lecturer in Italian, teaching Italian language and culture courses at all levels, while also engaging in a wide range of research-led interdisciplinary teaching. She's served as head of the School of Languages and Culture from 2015 to 2021 and Associate Dean of Academic Programs for the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences from 2022 to 2024. Throughout her career, Sally has worked with colleagues across and beyond the university to create interdisciplinary opportunities for students and staff, and has led many curricular initiatives, including the introduction of the Bachelor of Global Studies, demonstrating a deep commitment to equity and diversity in all of her work. She's now the Director of Global Studies at this university. Sally's research focuses on transdisciplinary understandings of visual and narrative representations and marginalised identities, and on historical memory in visual and material culture. Her current funded research collaboration with Associate Professor of History, Giacomo Lichner, investigates how communities, activists, and artists in Italy are offering new ways to respond to the material heritage of fascism, relating local interventions to global and transnational phenomena. Sally's also worked on screen and photographic representations of disability and mental disorder, and on representations of violence against women. She's also worked on migrants and migrant writing, on practices of travel writing and photography, and on the history and theory of interactions between the visual arts and writing. And she's translated works and disciplines from ethnography to feminist theory. Sally's work has had an impact in diverse fields, and she's collaborated with top scholars from across a broad range of humanities and social science disciplines, while mentoring and encouraging more junior scholars. She's a recipient of awards for research and teaching excellence, including a 2023 VUSA Outstanding Lecturer Award, and receives consistently outstanding feedback on her teaching. Her students have gone on to succeed in many different fields, including in academic positions in Australia, the UK, and the US. In this lecture on navigating difficult heritage, Professor Hill rethinks fascist Italy's monuments and memory from the local to the global. She will explore monuments, place names, images and plaques that recall painful or shameful events of the past and that are controversial all around the world. Arguments about these kinds of objects often swing between the two poles of, on the one hand, these calls to destroy them completely or preserve them untouched. Sally asks, what other choices are there and what might they entail? So looking at a range of international examples, her lecture focuses on approaches to dealing with the many visual and material remnants of Italy's 20-year fascist dictatorship. Professor Hill argues that looking at the ways local communities, artists, activists and institutions in other parts of the world have dealt with these so-called difficult heritage can suggest insights to help navigate our own troubled histories and their complex contemporary meanings. So, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Sally Hill and invite her to the podium.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatira, e ngā iwi e hui hui nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Buonasera a tutti e grazie di cuore di essere qui stasera. Thank you all so much for being here. It's absolutely amazing to see you all, and I'm so touched and happy that you're here. Tonight's lecture is about the stories we tell about the past. So I hope you'll forgive me if I start by sharing just a little bit of the story of how I come to be here. Basically, it's a story of a huge amount of help and a huge amount of luck. To be honest, an academic career didn't necessarily look all that plausible early on. So if this is where I've ended up, it's due to my first and most enormous piece of luck, being born to two amazing people who never stopped encouraging me to explore and learn. I'm told that my first words were, "Look at ah," and I think that says a lot about how my parents, Leslie and Paul, encouraged my sister Jennifer and me to look at our surroundings with openness and curiosity. Our dad died 10 years ago next month, but every day I'm guided by what I learned from him and from my mum. Tonight would have made him very happy. And I'm very happy to have my mum and my sister Jenny here, as well as so many other dear friends and family who are here with me in person or in spirit this evening. Thank you all for your love and support. Another truly amazing piece of luck I had was meeting David Cappy back in 1992. Since then, we've had 3.5 decades of adventures all over the world, our two amazing children, James and Kate, and so much fun together. And of course, Ivy. David also brought me the luck of the best in-laws ever, and I'm so grateful that they're able to be here tonight as well. The other great luck I've had is to have had some absolutely phenomenal teachers. If we're lucky, we all encounter at least one of those teachers who help us to see some potential in ourselves we would have never realised without them. I am incredibly lucky to have two of them here tonight. My high school English teacher, Helen Sturm, and my master's thesis supervisor, Mike Han. Together with my PhD advisor, Rebecca West, they literally changed my life. They encouraged me to think about how stories change the world. They taught me to look at them critically and to make those sometimes humbling, imaginative and empathetic leaps that come with studying languages, literatures and cultures. Because of them, I found the thread that I've followed in all my work, exploring the connections between stories, images, people and places. That thread led me all around the world and eventually back here to the School of Languages and Cultures, my academic home since 2004. I'm so grateful for the students and professional and academic staff there, and I feel especially lucky to have had 20 years as one of the 3 staff in Italian, with my dear colleagues Claudia Bernardi and Marco Sonzogni. Over its 100-year history at this institution, an astonishing number of ideas, initiatives, collaborations, and extraordinarily gifted students came out of that tiny program. The university and the country are the poorer for its loss and the richer for its legacy. Grazie infinite to Claudia and Marco for their comradeship and impegno. And grazie di cuore also to all of my extended Italian academic whānau, and especially to my dear friend and colleague Giacomo Lechner, who is the co-lead of the project I'm going to talk about this evening. His brilliant work and our 2 decades worth of conversations and collaborations have hugely enriched my life here at Te Herenga Waka. Being part of a community of scholars and teachers and researchers like this one is an amazing gift. And that's why it's been such a wonderful experience working with that community, some of whom are pictured here, on building our Global Studies program. I'm so touched to see so many of you here this evening, and especially very grateful to the students who've made the effort to come tonight, a truly heroic effort when I know how many assessments you have this week. It's a joy and a challenge and a privilege working with you, and it's taught me so much about why it's important to look at how global issues affect real people in the places they live. So tonight, I'd like to think about that in the context of how people relate to the histories of their places, starting from 3 questions. Why does it matter to think about what to do with the traces of discredited or controversial figures or periods from the past? What do they reveal about whose stories are shaping the present? And why should it matter to us how people grapple with these questions in places far away? Part of the answer to these questions lies in the fact that, as Joanna Kidman and Vincent O'Malley explain in their introduction to the book Fragments from a Contested Past, Remembrance, Denial in New Zealand History, every society, and certainly ours, has aspects of its past that haunt the present, shameful or painful histories that can't be laid to rest because they still cause harm. These contested histories leave an enduring and complicated legacy, and the objects, inscriptions, names and plaques that recall or obscure them have an ongoing impact through the people, communities and institutions that interact with them. Competing stories about the past play a vital role in shaping our present, and the debates they spark about freedom of expression, spaces for critical dissent, questions of power, and who gets to determine the versions of the past that shape the present, are especially urgent in a context of rising authoritarianism and increasing polarisation all around the world. But to explore these issues, I'd like to start by returning to my academic roots and reading you a poem. It was written as an epigraph in 1952 by anti-fascist writer, jurist, academic and politician Piero Calamandrei, one of the authors of Italy's remarkable post-war constitution, which founded the new republic on values of democracy, human rights and social justice. In 1952, convicted war criminal and former Nazi general Albert Kesselring was released from prison on the grounds of ill health, having already escaped his original death sentence. Having commanded German forces in Italy, he was convicted of mass executions and atrocities against civilians. Unrepentant, he claimed that rather than imprisoning him, the Italians should have built him a monument to thank him for his role in protecting their cultural artefacts during the occupation. In response, the citizens and partisans of the town of Cuneo in Piedmont unanimously decided to erect a memorial park in their town hall, engraved with the following words by Calamandrei. And I'm going to read them to you in the original beautiful Italian, and you can follow along with the translation. Lo avrai, camerata Kesselring, il monumento che pretendi da noi italiani. Ma con che pietra si costruirà? A deciderlo tocca a noi. Non coi sassi affumicati dai borghi inermi straziati dal tuo sterminio. Non con la terra dei cimiteri, dove i nostri compagni giovinetti riposano in serenità. Non con la neve inviolata delle montagne che per 2 inverni ti sfidarono, non con la primavera di queste valli che ti videro fuggire, ma soltanto col silenzio dei torturati, più duro di ogni macigno, soltanto con la roccia di questo patto, giurato fra uomini liberi, che volontari si adunarono per dignità e non per odio, decisi a riscattare la vergogna e il terrore del mondo. Su queste strade, se vorrai tornare, ai nostri posti ci ritroverai, morti e vivi con lo stesso impegno, popolo serrato intorno al monumento, che si chiama, ora e sempre, Resistenza. Kesselring's self-serving account of the massacres and deportations he had overseen as normal war operations, and of himself as the defender of Italy's artistic treasures, was an affront to his victims. So the metaphorical stones from which Calamandrei constructs his anti-monument are the silence of the murdered, the solidarity of the people who fought Nazism and fascism, and the dignity of their commitment to resisting oppression. His poem emphasises places and people, the destroyed villages of those who faced reprisals, the cemeteries where the dead partisans lie, the mountains where they fought and hid. It reminds us that above all, what lies at the heart of most controversies about contested monuments is a pressing urge to tell a story of injustice and resistance. It also provides insights into why these kinds of controversies are not ultimately about this or that piece of stone, street name, or inscription, but are fundamentally about the people who interact with them. These so-called difficult objects and the memories they embody or obscure are part of the landscapes people inhabit and the histories they inherit. They are important not so much for what they actually are, but for the power dynamics they make visible and what they tell us about what values are prioritised and whose stories are privileged in commemorating the past. The debates they spark about who, how, and what a particular society chooses to remember or forget are deeply rooted in local identities and cultures, but they are also located in a global context of deep, interconnected histories and ongoing and sometimes ferocious debates about how historical memory is made visible or hidden. There is, of course, a long tradition of defacing or destroying monuments to figures or ideologies that have been discredited or contested in moments of dramatic societal change. We might think, for example, of the toppling of the statue of George III in Manhattan after the Declaration of Independence in 1777. Partisans defacing the portrait of Adolf Hitler after the surrender of the German garrison in August 1944, or the citizens of Budapest with Stalin's decapitated stone head during the Hungarian uprising in 1956. Closer to our time, we can think of the iconic fall of Saddam Hussein's statue in April 2003, beamed around the world in what would turn out to be a premature symbol of his defeat. And sometimes these removals happen much later, after a long and painful process, like when the last statue of a fascist dictator, Francisco Franco, was taken down in mainland Spain in 2008. Often, protests over monuments or memorials arise from contemporary injustices with deep historical roots, as, for example, in the case of the Roads Must Fall protests in South Africa and other countries, or the Marine Memorial in Namibia, where the Reparations Now movement sought to draw attention to its fight for compensation for the loss of land during German colonial rule and the genocide of 1904 to 1908. Some of the best-known examples in recent times emerged from contestation and controversy around Confederate statues in the US as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. In particular, the 2020 protests that spread across the US and around the world after the murder of George Floyd brought international attention back to the physical and cultural heritage of racism and colonialism, emphasising their ongoing and traumatic legacies. They reignited protests against statues of figures like Confederate General Robert E. Lee, Christopher Columbus, Edward Colston, James Cook, and John Hamilton in our part of the world. These protests emphasise how monuments almost always tell a heroic, singular version of history, which can obscure the realities of historical violence and injustice and enduring effects on contemporary societies. But we've also seen backlash against these movements, both at the time and subsequently. For example, in the US, since the start of the second Trump administration, pressure from Republicans in Congress has already led to the mayor of Washington, D.C., ordering Black Lives Matter Plaza to be dug up. And Trump has signed an executive order calling for the restoration of statues and monuments that have been taken down or altered since 2020, in order to, in his words, perpetuate a false reconstruction of American history, inappropriately minimise the value of certain historical events or figures, or include any other improper partisan ideology, end quote. But false, inappropriate, or improper for whom is the key question. In all these cases, the question of who is telling the story of the past is crucial, and certainly not new. At the national level, this can often look like two parallel tracks that never meet, with the discourse on what to do about the objects themselves swinging between the two poles of knock them over or keep them as they are. But looking both locally and around the world, there are a series of alternatives to these two poles, reframings that can offer opportunities to engage in different kinds of conversations. These include artistic and community-focused interventions, such as the one Banksy proposed for what to do with the Colston Monument, which imagined it suspended in the moment of its toppling, accompanied by new sculptures of the protesters. Or here, Nicholas Galanin's temporary counter-monument to the statue of James Cook in Sydney's Hyde Park. Or, even closer to home, the project led by Ngāti Oneone at Puhikaiti, the Cook landing site. Other types of reframing include curation, as with these statue parks in Hungary and Taiwan, or musealisation and community engagement, as in the What Next exhibition on the Colston statue in Bristol. There is excellent scholarship being produced in this country and around the world on these topics, and a lot to be learned from a comparative approach to thinking about the deep histories that underlie them. I'm going to turn now to focus on what we can learn from Italy and what has been done or not done with the many remnants of its fascist past. I'll start with some background on why Italy as a whole is such a rich source of examples, and then zoom in on 3 key case studies in different parts of the country and what they can tell us about why focusing on specific local contexts is important. So, why Italy? One reason is the sheer scale of the problem. This map, produced by the Istituto Ferruccio Parri in 2023, gives you a sense of what that looks like. Every community, every city, province and region lives with built legacies of fascism constructed over the 20 years of Benito Mussolini's authoritarian regime. A regime that suppressed political dissent, persecuted Jews and other minorities, and embraced aggressive nationalism, imperialism, racism and militarism, with devastating impacts for Italian society and ultimately for the world. That meant that after World War II, those who founded the new republic were determined to ensure that such a regime could never return. In that context, there was quite a bit of de-fascistisation in the immediate aftermath, mainly consisting of the removal of fascist symbols like the fasces, or at least their axes, and references to Mussolini from many public buildings, as you can see in this image from Milan. But there were also ongoing contradictions. For example, blatantly fascist street names in honour of Mussolini or the March on Rome were renamed in honour of resistance heroes, the dates of liberation or the Republic. But names connected to Italy's imperial history and colonial ambitions before and during fascism remained in place, as Italian writer Ija Bashego and photographer Rino Bianchi have explored in their excellent book, Roma Negata, which traces the visible and invisible legacies of Italy's colonial history in the city of Rome. And as the Istituto Ferruccio Parri map shows, a huge number of plaques, buildings, inscriptions, artworks and monuments survived more or less intact. To be clear, these sites aren't just leftovers. They're woven into the very fabric of urban life on a massive scale. While many Italians might view this heritage with indifference, it also still invokes mixed emotions, pain, shame, or guilt, or in some cases, nostalgia and even pride. These are composite and contradictory emotions that shape a sense of historical and geographical belonging and sometimes reveal a collective exposed nerve. In 2017, American scholar Ruth Ben-Ghiat provoked a storm of controversy in Italy when she published this article, asking why there are so many fascist monuments still standing in Italy. She pointed out that many significant sites constructed under the regime and bearing visible traces of it are provided with no contextualisation or information about their history, but left instead as what she called depoliticised aesthetic objects. This is especially striking in a country in which almost every historic building from any other period has a panel explaining its cultural and historical significance. Responses from academics to far-right activists accused Ben-Ghiat of making an unjustified attack on Italy's history and cultural heritage, with one quite distinguished art historian comparing her article to the Taliban's destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan. Yet Ben-Ghiat's call for critical reflection on the vast material heritage of fascism applied to both monumental and mundane objects, like this manhole cover or a lamppost here in Piazza Duomo in Milan. It applied to high art and leftover slogans, to the artistic decoration of buildings, as well as more banal signs, inscriptions, and symbols. and it prompts a series of uncomfortable questions that different communities and scholars of Italy are trying to address. So, for example, what does it mean when national sports teams are presented in the headquarters of the Italian Olympic Committee in front of a mural entitled "The Apotheosis of Fascism"? You can see Mussolini beaming down from the top there. Or when Roman football fans must file past the obelisk still bearing Mussolini's name on their way to the stadium. Why does the state police headquarters of Lecce in Puglia still bear the words "everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state," drawn from a speech Mussolini made in Milan in 1925 to celebrate the third anniversary of the March on Rome that brought him to power? What does it mean for these words to have remained in place without context or commentary for all these years? Likewise, why does the state police barracks in Messina still bear two giant fasces with no particular aesthetic value, picked out in grey against a yellow background? And what on earth should we make of these paintings of a vampire like Mussolini, hailed by black shirts and World War I veterans in Ragusa's prefecture, where government-mandated memorial events, including Holocaust Memorial Day, are hosted in the same room, and where staff have to remind visiting school groups not to post selfies doing fascist salutes below the image of Il Duce? And what does it mean that these are all public sites under state control? Suggesting that such sites are neutral urban spaces separate from their political origins, or that they can somehow serve as warnings from history without any intentional effort to the contrary, is at best naive or simply oblivious to the scars still left by fascism. At worst, it can serve as a deceptive cover for the influence of contemporary far-right memory culture. Since the 1980s, the anti-fascist consensus built into the Italian constitution and the country's political and cultural frameworks has weakened, while the legacies of fascism have not lost their significance or their impact. They haven't just faded into a shared history that's out of reach or no longer debated. Instead, they've evolved and taken on new meanings, revealing direct lines of continuity to contemporary socio-political phenomena, such as attitudes towards immigration and the shifting multicultural profile of Italian society. The 2022 election of Giorgia Meloni, the first Prime Minister in Italy's Republican history from a neo-fascist background, highlights their ongoing relevance as rallying points for a rising far right. A lot of the rhetoric from Meloni's government echoes and tries to draw legitimacy from the messages found in these monuments, tapping into themes of discipline, aggressive national pride, and exclusionary ethno-nationalism. This issue hasn't been addressed historically on a national level, but instead mostly dealt with in a reactive and rhetorical way. But when we look at it at a local level, we can see that these built legacies are experienced in so many different ways. They include family memories, local identities, and contemporary political struggles. It is at that local level that interventions on fascist sites can potentially open up new ways to engage with a heritage that is complex, contested, and deeply emotive. And so I turn now to my 3 case studies. One widely admired example of this type of intervention took place in the city of Bolzano. Bolzano is located in the autonomous region of Trentino Alto Adige, a bicultural region with a history of nationalist oppression and a real fear of its contemporary resurgence. Bolzano's town finance department, pictured here, is housed in a fascist-era building with a huge sculpted frieze by Hans Piefrader across its facade, entitled The Triumph of Fascism, with Mussolini on horseback at the centre, right arm raised, with the fascist slogan, "Believe, obey, fight," carved below him. Over 36 metres long, the frieze depicts the history of fascism in 57 panels. Despite the deep scars inflicted on the region by the regime, the monument had remained in place essentially untouched. A focal point for neo-fascists and a painful reminder of a brutal and repressive period of Italian history, the monument was a source of conflict and distress. In 2011, Bolzano decided to launch a public bid for ideas on how to diffuse and contextualise the monument. Rather than destroying it or leaving it there untouched, the town sought a solution that would, and I quote, transform the frieze into a place of memory so that it will no longer be visible directly, but accessible thoughtfully within an appropriately explanatory context, end quote. A jury made up of local community members, a journalist, a history professor from the local university, and experts in architecture, museum curation, and art evaluated nearly 500 proposals. 5 were shortlisted. The Town Council voted them, with the public contributing to the discussions. The winning proposal, installed in 2017, has been widely recognised as a groundbreaking solution. The artists behind it, Arnold Holzknecht and Michele Bernardi, superimposed over the whole length of the frieze in LED lights a quotation from German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. It reads, "Nobody has the right to obey," in the 3 local languages, Italian, German, and Ladin. A series of informative panels on the opposite side of the square provides information about the frieze's history, its relationship to the history of Bolzano, and the relevance of the quotation from Arendt. That quotation effectively challenges the rhetoric of Mussolini's call to believe in, obey, and fight for fascism, while allowing the original monument to still be seen. It invites the viewer to reflect on the complex history behind the monument and emphasises how our present perspectives always inform how we think about the past, as well as our choices about the actions we will take in the future. Contesting the imperatives of the original message with a quotation that emphasises the importance of individual moral choice, the installation provides a non-invasive way to give a new visual and semantic meaning to the monument, one that could also be removed without damage if in future the town wanted to make a different choice. This intervention is understandably held up as an exemplar of a reasoned, inclusive, and innovative solution to a contested site of memory. But it is also exceptional, defined by and only possible because of the specific circumstances of its province and region. In other words, the Bolzano demonstrates how local solutions like this offer a way of understanding the contemporary meanings that communities give these complex historical objects, not as a rhetorical exercise, but as a result of the lived experiences of those communities. Yet examining the range of different interventions and choices made at the local level in different places also serves as a reminder that not all such interventions result in the kind of award-winning promotion of humanism, tolerance, and democracy seen in Bolzano. National or local authorities often make very different choices to the consultative and thoughtful ones made in Bolzano, opting instead to obscure, camouflage, or even subtly amplify the original message and ongoing meaning of a specific site. One example of this is the Sicilian city of Syracuse's Monument to the Fallen Italians in Africa, commissioned by Mussolini in 1938. Originally dedicated to the Italian soldier and worker in Africa, it was intended for the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. With the outbreak of World War II, plans to erect the monument were put on hold and then abandoned following Italy's defeat and the liberation of its colonies. Stored in pieces for years, in 1952 the government decided to send it to Syracuse, the key Italian port for embarkations to the Italian colonies during the fascist period, where it remained in storage for another 16 years before finally being erected on the cliffs facing towards East Africa in 1968. Renaming the monument to honour the fallen Italians in Africa shifts the focus from admiration of fascist colonisation to pity for the dead. Yet the monument's design still trumpets the original message. The ship-like structure features bronze figures of the armed forces and Italian workers in Africa, surrounded by battle scenes and agricultural imagery. The uncomfortable dissonance between title and content is perhaps partly why, for the next 20 years, it was fenced off, as you can see here, and surrounded by little more than litter, weeds, and graffiti. In 1986, a new piazza was created, over the years accumulating features like a viewpoint, bike path, a kiosk for that all-important fascist monument Apericena, and a playground with, as you can see, as you glimpse in the corner there, benches that face carefully away from the monument. Those of you who have had small children will know that you need the benches to face the playground, not the other way round. So this is a striking choice. Between 1999 and 2020, other memorials were added to the piazza, further integrating this explicitly fascist and imperialist monument into the cityscape, and both diffusing and normalising its narrative of colonial conquest and racist subjugation. In 2020, prompted by Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia party, the Syracuse Council erected another plaque just outside the piazza to commemorate victims of the foibe, the mass murders and deportations of Italians in Istria, Fiume and Dalmatia by Yugoslav partisans during and after World War II. This was part of the National Remembrance Day of the Exodus in Foibe, established in 2004. Although its introduction, at the behest of right-wing politicians, was supported by politicians across the political spectrum in Italy, there have subsequently been accusations that this Memorial Day has been instrumentalised by the far right as a means of creating false equivalence between fascist and partisan violence. And it has sparked intense discussions about memory, identity, and the interpretation of history in Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia. The Syracuse Council stated that the goal of the memorial plaque was to promote national reconciliation on a controversial and painful page of Italian history. Yet this also raises questions about whose pain is acknowledged and whose is ignored. The monument to the Italians fallen in Africa remains silent on Italy's imperial crimes in Africa, with no gesture toward redress or acknowledgement. On one side of the piazza, the city seeks reconciliation. On the other, it literally turns its back on it. This has not gone unchallenged in recent years. The monument has been graffitied and daubed in red paint, and in 2021, several marble blocks were chipped off and thrown onto the rocks below, prompting a counter-response by neo-fascist Casa Pound activists. Casa Pound has regularly used the defence of fascist monuments, particularly monuments to the fallen, as a propaganda tool, portraying themselves on social media as respectful, patriotic, and sensible young idealists, as opposed to those they label as destructive, woke activists of the left. While in this case they did retrieve some marble fragments from the cliff, no actual restoration occurred. Yet the symbolic value of the action was significant and ties into other far-right efforts to use monuments to the fallen to promote a specific neo-fascist memory politics that aligns with their contemporary goals. So the monument to the fallen Italians in Africa exists within a complex palimpsest of public memorialisation. Its complicated history highlights the role that sites of memory play in a city's socio-cultural ecosystem and how local communities and institutions can shape their meanings. The objects accumulated around the monument position it as either a benign leisure spot, a site of mourning for the fallen, or perhaps a sly nod to a far from disavowed past. A semi-camouflaged elephant in the piazza, it reflects what seems to be a concerted effort to avert the gaze from the dauntingly vast material evidence of the fascist past and its continuities and resonances in the present. My final example stands in contrast to this. It's also the closest to my heart of all the places Giacomo and I have come across during this research. We stumbled across it by accident as the result of an intervention in another town far away, Civitanova Marche, where in 2013 the decision was made to change a street name from one in honour of former fascist functionary and post-war founder of the neo-fascist Italian social movement, Giorgio Almirante, to Nelson Mandela Street. We were struck by the choice of an international anti-apartheid hero rather than, for example, a leader of the African resistance against Italian imperialism, such as Omar al-Mukhtar, the lion of the desert who led Libyan resistance against Italian occupation in the 1920s. A quick Google search revealed that there is in fact just one such street to be found in the whole of Italy. Via Omar al-Mukhtar in the tiny village of Isnello in the mountains not far from Palermo. Improbable as it might seem, the tiny town of Isnello sits at the intersection of a very specific set of local issues and profound global questions about citizenship, participation, inclusion, inequality, conflict, and colonisation. In this one tiny town, we discovered several examples of different kinds of intervention and non-intervention on so-called difficult heritage that make it both an exception and paradigmatic. As well as being the only place in Italy with a road dedicated to Omar al-Mukhtar, Isnello is also special for its explicit identification of local identity with the resistance and the Italian constitution through its citizen Giovanni Ortoleva, known as Iacon, who left Isnello to fight with the partisans of the Garibaldi Brigade in Piedmont in northern Italy. He was one of 20 partisans shot by fascists in the massacre of Salusola on the 9th of March 1945 in retaliation for an attack on Black Brigade trucks. Offered the opportunity to escape by a fellow Sicilian who was a member of the fascist group that had captured him, he refused to save himself, dying with his companions. He is memorialised in the Isnello Cemetery, and the town's connection to the partisan resistance is underlined by the quotation from the same Piero Calamandrei, whose monument to Kesserling we encountered earlier, placed on the facade of the council building in 2011. It reads, "If you want to go on a pilgrimage to the place where our constitution was created, go to the mountains where the partisans fell, to the prisons where they were incarcerated, and to the fields where they were hanged. Wherever an Italian died to redeem freedom and dignity, go there, young people, and ponder, because that was where our constitution was born." The example of Isnello both connects into this national narrative and highlights the significance of local identity in managing the memories of fascism and anti-fascism. Ortoleva is celebrated as a partisan hero, but he is also recognised as a beloved son of the locality. In the ceremony held this year on the 9th of March to commemorate 80 years since the massacre and Ortoleva's death, the mayor, Marcello Catanzaro, spoke of the need to share Ortoleva's message of resistance against oppression with young people. At the same time, the very friendly and sweet lady who lives in this building, with its traces of Mussolini's infamous "Believe, Fight, Obey" slogan, takes pleasure in visiting tourists stopping to take photos of its historical message, even if that message is itself objectionable. A crumbling commemorative plaque from 1931 bears an inscription to the memory of Mussolini's brother, Arnaldo, seemingly forgotten rather than venerated by the side of the road. Isnello shares with many Italian locations a coexistence of divided memories of the fascist period that occupy the same civic space. But here these memories have been incorporated into a conversation about the values the town wants to espouse for the future and its choice of which of its ancestors to honour. This is clear from one last story about Isnello. In 2021, the town council discovered a document showing that their village had, like many Sicilian towns, given honorary citizenship to Mussolini on the occasion of his visit to Sicily in 1924. The council held a lively discussion with local residents and a debate in council, and ultimately voted to revoke Mussolini's honorary citizenship. The local debate surrounding the motion mirrors national debates about historical record versus historical redress, with one councillor voting against it because of concerns about rewriting history. Yet the tone of the debate, the consultation with citizens, and the serious discussion of the question reflect the possibility for a conversation about not just a particular contested historical item, be it material or archival, but about the values by which a particular society wants to live. As the minutes of the council meeting describe, next to speak was the mayor, who explained the reasons for the proposal. The mayor spoke about the Constitution and the principles it contains, about the need to ask ourselves whether today many of its principles are truly respected, such as those regarding health and work. He expressed the wish that young people might consider this and that the revocation of Benito Mussolini's honorary citizenship should be a source of reflection, discussion, and stimulus for debate within the community. Isnello's engagement with these big ideas suggests the ongoing and perhaps underestimated importance of Italy's constitution as a beacon of democratic participation at the most local level. But however inspiring this remarkable little village may be, the goal of foregrounding the local isn't to elevate one community as an exemplar to copy and paste into other contexts, but rather to appreciate the distinctiveness of each case. As Kidman and O'Malley write, what a society chooses to remember and forget speaks to its contemporary priorities and sense of identity. understanding how that process works enables us to better imagine a future with a different or wider set of priorities. Similarly, in his 2024 discussion of Taiwan's memory culture, Dominic Meng-Xuan Yang suggests that the question of removing or modifying contested fragments of a society's past is perhaps not the most important question to focus on. Rather, it is the actual unfolding of the lengthy, nuanced, and intensely emotional process of negotiation behind removals or modifications that we should really pay attention to. It is in these emotional disputes and trying negotiations, and in the substantive transformations taking place over time, that we find signs of enduring change towards a better, shared future." End quote. So as we contemplate increasing authoritarianism, the undermining of political and human rights, erosion of civil liberties, and greater instability around the world, looking to these examples of local engagement and debate about the meanings of the past for the present offers a possible path forward. Like Piero Calamandrei and like the citizens of Isnello, we have the opportunity to walk backwards into our futures, looking back not so much to save or destroy this or that piece of stone or paper, but rather to debate which choices of our ancestors we want to honour and commemorate, which values our communities want to live by in the present, and what stories we will tell our young people, metaphorical monuments around which to construct a shared future.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Avril Coxhead. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and the third woman standing here this evening in red and black, so doing a good job tonight. So to acknowledge Professor Robin Longhurst, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, academics, senior leaders, colleagues, students and friends from our faculty and across the university who are here tonight. It's my first main job. It's also my absolute honour and privilege to propose a vote of thanks for our colleague Professor Sally Hill on the occasion of her inaugural lecture. And I could stop there, but I won't. Firstly, warm greetings to your family, Sally, to David, James, Kate, Leslie, your mum, Paul, your dad, here in spirit and in love, Sister Jenny, auntie, here with all her suitcases. Welcome back. Auntie from Aussie, parents-in-law, brother and sister-in-law and their kids, your old and not so old friends, including teachers, mentors, colleagues and supervisors, and last but not least, your students, also old and not so old. It's such a pleasure to have you all here this evening. Tonight, Professor Hill talked about navigating difficult heritage from local to global, rethinking fascist Italy's monuments and memory. This work comes from both research and personal interest in language and culture writ large and small, and earlier work in visibility and disability in fascism and the nature of history and memory in film. Professor Hill doesn't shy away from the big questions, such as what we might do with our past or not do, because inaction is as much a choice as action, and how our past is represented, and how do we talk about accounts of our histories which may be repressed, shameful, or polarised, or all three. Tonight, Sally wove together her great love of Italy and Italian, huge capacity for collaboration, well-honed research skills and insight to help us see more, think more, and be open to discussion and developing understanding across cultures, languages, political divides, and landscapes. Sally provided an example of small-scale, highly localised decision-making in a village not much bigger than my hometown to illustrate possible ways to talk and move forward together. Hope, even in small measures, is still hope. Professor Hill's lecture took us on a multilingual journey, using words and pictures to illustrate not only the challenges of monuments, memories, histories and pasts, but to remind us of how deeply personal these challenges might be, why they matter, and why they're so important both globally and now. When we were talking about the Inaugural just last week, I was thinking about Sobor Park in Hungary, the place of Stalin's boots. I walked around that park with Romanian Hungarian friends many years ago, mimicking some of the poses of the statues. I'm a bit more mature now, and talking about my friends' childhoods and early adult years under the shadows of such monuments. I remember thinking that the ways my friends saw these monuments was imbued with memories which I could never fully share or understand. While hitchhiking was easy in those days because you could always arrange to meet your fellow hitchhikers under the Stalin monument in the next town, Sally has reminded us, me and all of us, that words, memories, language, decisions and discussions and monuments matter. Professor Hill's publication record shows a volume of work across cultures, languages, literatures and modes, encompassing analyses of landscapes, photographs, films, texts and voices lost and found. It's published by high-quality presses and journals with colleagues in this room and without, and Sally is invited to speak at conferences across the globe. She raises the voices of those who were or are unable, unwilling or unbidden to speak, and she reminds us that while it is important to listen to what people say, it's very important to watch what they do. Now, one of the questions which is commonly asked of freshly minted professors is what kind of professor you will be. This might be somewhat of a strange question, it was to me. It may be difficult to imagine ways in which putting letters in front of your name might affect how you behave, what you aim to achieve, or how you might change. We've witnessed tonight the kind of professor Sally Hill is. Widely read and well-informed, curious, interested, highly capable, yes, but also warm, engaged and engaging, collaborative, hugely respected and deeply admired. I asked colleagues to tell me more about working with Sally. Someone whose English worked with Sally in her role as Associate Dean Academic is in the room tonight and doesn't want to be named, said that she very much appreciates Sally's humanity, empathy, intelligence, quick-witted sense of humour, resilience and warmth, and her real ability to make people feel heard, seen, included and valued. This colleague, like many, is clear that Sally is one of the very best people she has ever worked with. And believe me, Catherine has worked with many, many people. Nicola Gilmore, current head of School of Languages and Cultures, noted that Sally was a warm, kind and supportive head of school and is creative and passionate, a creative and passionate advocate for languages. She's always looking for ways to show the university and the wider community how valuable it is to learn another language. And in this audience, we have members of the first cohort of the Bachelor of Global Studies, spearheaded by Sally. She's an extraordinary teacher of Italian language and culture and now global studies, and has awards to prove it. Now, as Ivy Dog and anyone who has the great pleasure of spending even a small amount of time with Sally in a day, a week, a month or a year knows, she has the great capacity to make you feel heard, listened to and better about things. This is the kind of professor she is, and we are much better for her companionship, quiet counsel and generous spirit. Now, this is a moment of celebration for us all. It's a total joy for me to offer this vote of thanks here today. I'll soon welcome you to join us all in the Hunter Common Room through those doors, some light refreshments and time to congratulate Sally and her family in your own ways. But first, I ask you all to share in showing gratitude and great celebration for Professor Sally Hill in the usual way by a loud and potentially uncomfortably long for Sally round of applause. Good job. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. Go on through the doors. Thank you again, Sally. Welcome everybody to come and join us. And what a great evening. Enjoy yourselves.